What's going on, guys? Welcome to another Eastern Current podcast. We're excited to be back for week 2 after our little hiatus, our little break, and got a special guest on here today that I'm going to introduce here in a second. We're very excited to have him on. But before we get into that, we're going to talk about our sponsors of this show. So our first one is J&J Boat Detailing. Oh, I slid that image around a little bit. J&J Boat Detailing, and they full service boat detailing. They'll come to your house. They'll come to your boat lift, wherever you are, and detail your boat. I've had them detailing my boats, and they just do an incredible job. They don't miss anything. Just really, really thorough job of detailing. I've had some other detail jobs done here around the Wilmington area that I've been a little upset with, and I'm definitely always upset when I try to do it myself because I'm just not nearly as good as J&J. But they also, if you need it, if you keep your boat in the water, they have a dive team that could go under and scrub the bottom and do underwater work as well. That's J&J Boat Detailing with the code EC2022. You can get 10% off your first service, so definitely check them out. And the other sponsor of this podcast is T&L Table Company. It's a buddy of mine up in Swansboro, North Carolina. Sneeds Ferry, North Carolina. And he builds really, really awesome custom wood tables like the podcast table that I'm sitting at now, which when we get the new podcast studio set up, we're going to have a couple camera angles. You'll really be able to see it. But I think next week I'll pull a picture in to show y'all. But it is just a really, really well-built table. He does all kinds of custom woodwork, and I think you'll be really, really happy with that if you need any custom woodwork done. But before I get too carried away and start tripping over my words here, I want to go ahead and bring on our special guest from Texas, Waiter Dave. What's going on?
Yeah, hey, Jud, how are you?
Oh, doing good. Thanks so much for hopping on here and chatting with us this week.
Yeah, I hate to start a podcast with correcting you, but you said I was from Texas. Now, I love to fish in Texas, but I'm actually from Florida, which I know you.
Oh, you are in Florida?
I am in Florida.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
That's my lack of research on Instagram that of where you're located. Now I'm just very embarrassed and flustered. So what? Well, but this is even better for me. This is more organic.
Yeah, well, no. So I'm actually based out of the Tampa Bay area in Florida, but you probably see a lot of my Instagram posts from Texas. I get out there at least a couple times, if not more often. I love fishing around the Corpus Christi area, Baffin Bay, Lower Laguna Madre, in that area. And in fact, when I do go, I usually end up fishing with I think the fellow that maybe told you about me, Wyatt Purcell. So
yes, and I think that's probably where my confusion came from with Wyatt being in Texas now, and I think that's where it all kind of unfolded for me, thinking that you were from Texas. But I was really jealous. Now I'm a little less jealous that you're from Florida. So,
well, if you can see the reels on my rod rack behind me, you notice that there's only one. They're all spinning gear, so you know I'm not from Texas.
That's true. You know bait casters out there.
Only one bait caster, so that would eliminate me from.
That is very true.
Texas, right there. But,
that is very true. Well, I do apologize for messing that up.
No,
I'm gonna blame it on Wyatt. So, well, cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about kind of your story, how you got into fishing, how you ended up in Florida. Did you grow up there, or did you move there? Just kind of take us through your story from when you started fishing and how it's brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, well, probably like a lot of addicted fishermen, I started fishing probably as soon as I could cast a Zebco 202 reel. I grew up in Michigan, which happens to be a fish crazy state as well, and I grew up with a pond and a creek in my backyard. And my parents love to tell the story that from the time I was old enough to walk, I'd be down there near that pond and, fishing, starting with bits of hot dog and bread and whatever I could steal out of the refrigerator from my mom, and catching bluegills and catfish and whatever. But grew from there and really started as a freshwater fisherman in Michigan. And then we'll fast forward quickly. Upon graduating from college, I left to go to Florida, and primarily because I love to fish, not big into ice fishing, and so the lure of fishing all year round, and for just the numerous saltwater species was really one of the reasons that I came to Florida. And so when I moved to Florida, I was, had just left college and was broke, like most guys out of college, and so didn't have a boat. Kayaks were pretty rare back then. That's how old I am. And so, it was either a John boat, maybe a canoe, something like that. But I couldn't even afford one of those. So when I moved to Florida, it was bridges, piers, seawalls. That was kind of where I started fishing down here and learning learning the ropes with some of the different saltwater species. And I happened to actually be fishing along a seawall one day down off the waterfront in downtown St. Petersburg, Florida. And I saw this guy walking on. It looked to me like he was walking on the water, but I just, like most people that come in here, he was probably 300-400 yards offshore, and I'm like, how can that guy be standing up in the water that far out? I just assumed it was deep. Well, I quickly realized that he was on a grass flat, and that in fact there were grass flats and sandbars all over the place down in Florida. And what was most important, I saw the guy was catching a bunch of fish, and more than I was from the seawall. So I waited for him to come back in and started talking to him. And, he said, yeah, I come out here just about every night, and I catch snook, I catch trout, I catch redfish. And, I was just, was really intrigued.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the start of it. And I, threw on an old pair of tennis shoes, a pair of shorts, and a T-shirt. And I was out there the next day wade fishing. And, that was it. I was just, no pun intended, but I was hooked. There was just something about being in the water and having a chance to do some sight casting, landing the fish while you're in the water with them. There's just something I just fell in love with it. And so kind of, continued that route and started looking for more and more places where I could access areas that I could wade fish. And again, fortunately, in the Tampa Bay area, there's lots of great areas to wade fish. We have lots of causeways that we can wade into firm ground. Lots of shallow grass flats adjacent to parks, boat launches, and things like that. So there were numerous opportunities. But back then, unlike now, there really wasn't. There was no internet. Hard to believe. And so basically, you had to kind of learn by either reading magazines, and here it was Florida Sportsman was kind of the fishing magazine for saltwater down here, and that was it. And I, every month I couldn't wait to get out and learn about, new things. And even then there wasn't a whole lot about wade fishing. But basically it was trial and error. And I spent probably 10 years just learning things the hard way. And, I kick myself now. I think about, what people can learn in just, a matter of a short period of time on Google Earth, on doing searches on YouTube, like on your podcasts. You can learn 10 years worth of trial and error in a matter of months, right? And so the learning curve it's just tremendous what you can do these days. And you don't have to necessarily put in all the pain and suffering that guys like I used to put in order to kind of learn the ropes.
It's almost unfair, or I would say it is unfair.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's unfair. I had a lot of fun doing it, but I spent a lot of time fishing and not so much time catching.
Right.
Especially early on, right? I used live bait, dead cut bait. Artificials were not even. I don't think I even used artificials for probably the first 3 or 4 years I fished down there, because I didn't ever see anybody using them.
Right.
And so didn't really have anybody to kind of teach me how to use them. So it was mostly, live bait, as I said, for the most part. Again, I was kind of broke, so buying live shrimp wasn't really a choice. So I actually found a cast net one day on a flat that someone had either lost or whatever, and kind of fixed it up and started using that, learned how to get a cast net going and casting for bait. But that kind of opened things up a little. But as I said, that was really the start for me. It was just it was out of necessity to begin with, but it quickly became a love of mine. But there came a time when I, finally started making a few bucks, and I actually bought a John boat, and I thought, wow, this is going to open a whole new world for me. I can, just explore all these flats. And what I found myself doing is I'd take it out to spoil islands, or I'd go out to sandbars, and I was wading again. So I just noticed, wait a minute, I just didn't like fishing from the boat. So really what the boat became for me was an avenue to new places to wade fish, right, that I couldn't get to from shore. And even to this day, I have a 25-foot bay boat. I have, I think, 3 kayaks. I have a couple paddle boards. I use them all, but I only use them primarily to get me to places where I can get out and wade fish.
Yeah, that's
cool. Over the years, what I've learned is it's not only do I enjoy it, but it's an incredibly effective way to catch a lot of fish and catch big fish. And I think that's one of the things that really surprises people is how well you can do. But it's a simple, low impact way to fish. You're stealthy, and as I said, it really opens the doors to catch. I think fish that people just can't even imagine that you could do in water that maybe knee deep or less. Right?
Yeah, that's awesome. Well,
yeah. And so that's I just started doing that, and so I've been wade fishing now for it's hard to believe, but 40 years, right? And primarily here in the Tampa Bay area. So there's probably not a wadeable spot within, I'm going to say probably within 75 miles of the Tampa Bay area that I haven't fished at some point over the last 40 years. I mean, that's just
cool.
What I love to do is to explore. So it's a big part of it.
So tell me this. Nowadays we've got satellite imagery and you can hop online and before you, like wade fishing, access points is so important. So finding a place that you can even get to a flat, like as far as drive to or park or walk through an area, learning all that before we had satellite imaging and all that, was there a big learning curve? Was it tough? Were you having to sneak around gates and parking?
Sure.
Kind of take me through that process.
Well, it was a lot of drive time.
Yeah.
I mean, basically you go to the coast, right? And
just try to drive.
Start following roads that went around the coast.
Yeah.
One of the things I did early on, I got a list of parks. There's, of city, county, state parks, or even national parks. And in Florida, there's a lot of great parks that have access to the water. So that was kind of the first thing I did. So I really started scoping out a lot of the parks that we had and identified those areas that had, really good water access. Then boat launches was another thing I discovered. Wow, a lot of the areas where there were boat launches had adjacent areas that you could wade as well along different shorelines. And again, both of those, you could find lists even back then. You could buy the magazine that or a map even that would list the different parks and for boat launches and things like that. So I just started exploring those. And a lot of it was also just obvious stuff, driving over causeways. Down here, there's a line of barrier islands, which is where most of the beaches are here all along the Gulf Coast. And there's a causeway that connects just about every one of these barrier islands to the mainland. And so these causeways tend to have some, great access. And for the most part, most of them, they dredged the flats adjacent to create the fill for these causeways. And so what you have is a channel that runs right along and parallel to almost every one of these causeways. So you've got a built-in structure almost immediately right there.
Yeah.
A lot of these causeways they've piled up rocks and other riprap, right? So you got all kinds of great rocks and structure along the shoreline. You tend to have kind of firm, sandy bottom because they also tend to be near, passes and things like that. So you've got a lot of water movement, so it tends to be less muddy. So you got firm, sandy or shelly bottom. You've got deep channels adjacent and rocky. So it kind of all the structure built right in, and so the causeways can be just fabulous. The same thing in Texas, for that matter. It really is. I mean, there's a lot of great causeways down there to fish, and you can just, a lot of times you just can pull right on over and park and get out and go. You don't even have to walk very far.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then the last piece that there really is kind of easy and obvious here are beaches. I mean, we just have loads and loads of beaches, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize down here, that the fishing, especially in the summertime, snook fishing along the beaches here, kind of anywhere from where we are south, and actually quite honestly, the range for the snook has actually probably moved 75 to 100 miles even north of here, to believe it or not, in the last 5-10 years. So, but there's a great beach fishery for snook, trout, redfish, flounder, and then obviously mackerel come in certain times, there's tarpon and all the rest. But so there's just so many different opportunities, and that's why for wade fishing, there's Texas is really is right up there with Florida. And it's one of the reasons why I love Texas. And people are wade fish crazy in Texas, even more so than they are here. But it's a great way to do it. But yeah, so it's you had to put your time in, but you kind of had to figure it out on your own. It took a lot longer to do it. You might think you've got a spot, and not until you actually get down there and find out and walk in. And it's still the same even with Google Earth. You may find what you think is the perfect flat or the perfect entry point. You get in, and next thing you know, you're waist deep in mud, right?
Right.
Or there's so much rock in there that you can't get through it. Or you find out it's private property, and next thing you know, you got the sheriff yelling at you, wanting to know why you're snooping around in some guy's backyard or whatever it might be. But so so I had a lot of that. I mean, what I will say is, I might have been arrested a few times, but I was never convicted of trespassing. So
that's awesome.
Usually I was able to. No, I shouldn't say I was always able to talk my way out of it.
Yeah.
But I haven't had nearly as much of that since I discovered Google Earth. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. It's always, you can get away with walking through people's backyards with a fishing rod when you're like 6 to 12 years old, but then when you become a grown adult and you're walking through someone's yard with a fishing rod, they take it a little more seriously.
Well, actually, one of the few advantages of getting old like I am now, they start to feel sorry for you when you get old like I am. You're like, wow, this guy doesn't have a lot of time left. Let's let him have a little bit of fun before he's going down. So they got to get away with some of that at this point.
That's awesome. So as far as your flats fish or your wade fishing goes, are you primarily trying to sight fish? Or are you doing a mixture of sight fishing and blind casting? What does that look like on foot? Because I've done a little bit of wade fishing myself for redfish and for bonefish, but just very little. It's just something that I haven't done much of. I've done some surf fishing and beach fishing, but down there, is it a good mixture of the two?
It's both.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got certain areas that we've got just beautiful, clear water, firm grass flats, and we do have the chance to sight fish, right? Snook and redfish in particular are probably what we do more sight fishing for down here. The trout tend to be a little bit deeper, so it's a little bit tougher to be sight casting for them most of the time. But along the beach is a great sight fishing opportunity here because we don't get a big surf a lot of the times, and the water's crystal clear. And summertime, you can walk a beach around here, and you can just see the snook lined up in the swash. And you get a chance to cast to them. Now, the tough part is, of course, most of the time those snook, if you're up on the beach, you can see them, they can see you, and they just kind of look back at you and laugh. But you do get a chance to do it. So I do a lot of sight fishing, but I probably do as much blind casting because also a lot of the areas that I fish, the water may not be clear, especially if we get some wind blowing, things like that. We have a lot of areas that we've got some of the coastal areas where we've got rivers that are entering into the Gulf. They're stained water, and so we'll get tannic acid that'll have kind of that tea-colored water, which will make it difficult to that. But it's both. So you need to understand how to do both. Probably like most fishermen, and I know like yourself, I love to sight fish when I have the opportunity to do it. It's certainly my preference over blind casting. But if all you have to do is blind casting, well, that's what you do.
Right.
And,
right.
When I catch that fish blind casting, I don't throw it back and say, man, I don't want you because I didn't see it. But
right.
so a little bit of both. But you really have to understand how to do both.
Yeah, definitely. I think well-rounded angler is one that understands both, does both, but knows when to. There's time like this morning. We wanted to sight fish. We really wanted to sight fish, but the conditions were not allowing it. We had clouds, and the redfish have been getting really shallow and tailing well, but we had a north wind switch around and blow. It was a little cooler this morning, and they just weren't shallow. So we had to resort back to a little blind casting, and it's just knowing when to shift and when to do what is really, I think, something that pays off a lot and allows you to learn more and grow as an angler. But like you said,
I think
a lot
of it depends on the areas that we're fishing too, because a lot of the areas here get a ton of pressure.
Yeah, and
so the fish are really skittish, and so really to get the opportunity to get close enough to first of all even see the fish, but to get a cast in front of them. Without spooking them can be difficult here. So,
for sure.
The tendency is, and it's important to learn how to make long casts to really improve your odds. You're covering more water, less likely the fish are going to be seeing you. So there's a lot of that going on there. But being able to cast a long way as well as accurately is really important for the wade fishing.
So as far as casting a long way, what are some of the trips. I cannot talk tonight. What are some of the tricks and tips that you've kind of put together for casting far? Because especially being weighting your lower as well, so you don't have that elevation to help you out.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, I suggest that people use lighter gear than. I mean, I get so many guys that want to bring their own gear when we go on a charter, right? And they're bringing, I get the guys who are bringing 10-foot, you know, rods with 6,000 or 7,000 series reels, and you're just really kind of overgunned for what we're doing.
Right.
And so I always try to make a point to, hey, listen, I've got gear available if you want to use it. And let me tell you what I'm using just in case you want to use your own. But, I'm using, for the most part, 7-foot, 6-inch rods, medium, even medium light, maybe medium heavy, depending on, but for the most part, medium power, fast action rods. I'm fishing with 2,500 or 3,000 series reels, so really pretty small, light stuff. And again, we're waiting, so I'm carrying this thing around with me all day, right?
Right.
So you want light gear. It's really important for the length of time and the number of casts that we're going to make in a day. You really want to keep it light. And then I'm fishing. If I'm fishing just by myself, I'm using probably 8-pound test. When I'm on a charter, I usually use 10-pound. It's not a huge difference, but the lighter lines definitely help with the longer casts. And so, I really promote that. And if we've got a decent reel with a good drag and we've set it right, I'm landing, 40-inch plus snook, 40-inch plus redfish on that gear, right? If I've got things set the right way. Now, if I'm going out targeting, like especially the reds are that big, I'm probably going to go a little bit heavier because I don't want to wear these fish out.
Right.
But the point is, I'm fishing in spots, and I do hook those kinds of fish, and they can handle it.
Yeah.
So keeping that little bit of longer rod, the 7.6, I think is important. And again, I'm fishing with really typically light lures, right? And just I fish all artificial. And not that I have any problem with fishing live bait or cut bait. It's a great and effective way to do it. But I've just gotten to the point where, throwing that cast net with a bad back isn't really great for me.
Right.
And I don't want to spend the time doing it. And quite honestly, over the years, I'm probably as or more effective. In fact, I know I'm more effective fishing with artificials than I am with live bait because I'm just covering a lot more water.
Right.
Typically. And so there's no question in my mind that that's a better way to go if you're really looking to cover a lot of ground and have a better chance of catching a lot of fish.
So covering ground with clients, it can be different sometimes with clients as opposed to fishing by yourself, fishing with buddies. As far as maybe they're not getting the cast everywhere exactly where you want it. What are some of the lures and baits that you find yourself fishing with your clients when you're wade fishing?
Yeah, so. Again, it depends upon the experience level. So, first time I take any client out, probably like you, I always have at least a phone conversation with them, just to kind of pick their brain, get a feel for their level of experience, right? Understand what species they want to target, what their expectations are. Because the worst thing as a guide is to have someone coming in with unrealistic expectations, because then they're going to be disappointed, right? So like you got a guy that say, hey, listen, all I want is I want to catch a slam and I want my PB on each of the species. Well, okay, that's what we'd like to do every time we go out. That's what we're trying to do. But the fact is, it doesn't happen very often, if ever. So maybe I'm not your guy. Okay, so maybe you want to look for someone else. That doesn't happen too often. But I occasionally will fire a client before I ever have given them the chance to hire me. Let's put it that way. But not too often. But so if I have an inexperienced fisherman. You tend to start them with, really kind of the simplest stuff, which also coincidentally happens to be some of the most effective stuff, right?
Right.
There's nothing simpler than a white paddle tail, right? As I tell people, it could be slam shady, it could be white, it could be glow, but basically it's a white shade of white paddle tail, 3.5-inch paddle tail. And if you really want to make sure it's simple, you can put it on a weighted twist lock hook, and really all they have to do is throw it out and reel it in, right? In fact, I tell them the only mistake you can make is trying to give it too much action. Let the paddle tail do the work. Maybe you speed it up or slow it down. But with a paddle tail rigged weedless, I mean, you can cast just about anywhere. And again, remember, I'm fishing shallow, so that's totally appropriate. So I may go, from a quarter to an eighth to a 16th ounce, depending upon how deep the water is or what the bottom structure is like. But, a typical way for me to start with that will be an 1/8 ounce. And if I'm fishing a, 3-inch paddle tail, it's probably going to be a 3/0, weighted twist lock hook on that paddle tail, and just let her rip. And I do spend a lot of time. It's one of the things. I guess my guiding is a little unique because it probably is more of my clients are actually interested in learning, and at least as interested in learning as they are in catching fish. In fact, I get a lot of clients. Listen, I don't even care if we catch fish. I just want to learn. I want you to teach me, how to cast. Make sure that I'm casting efficiently and effectively. Show me how. They want to learn how to tie knots. They want to know, when I'm putting out a lure, just not, what it is, but why am I putting that lure on, and explaining to them, right? Why am I casting over here versus over there? And a lot of that has to do with kind of how I got started really doing this over the last 5 or 6 years, which was being involved with Salt Strong, and I had done a wade fishing mastery course with them, and so that's how a lot of people have been introduced to me is their teacher in that course, and so going out with me is kind of an extension of that course.
Yeah, that's cool.
So I do a lot of teaching, and quite honestly, I love it and I enjoy it. There's nothing I've gotten, probably like you, I love watching one of my clients hook a fish, especially if it happens to be, they're beginners and they're just learning. I mean, just watching them and teaching them, and then see them actually catch a fish and watching the smile on their face, and then they're addicted.
Definitely.
And there's no better high in my mind than that. And I've gotten to the point where, and I do fish, which is also a little bit unique. I fish right alongside my clients all day long, which is a little bit unique for a guide. When I started, I didn't do that. I used to go out with guys on boats, and pretty much, they didn't fish. They were sitting there. They get you to the spot. They'd chum. They'd put a bait on there. They'd even throw the bait out there for me, hand me the rod, and it was all I could do to keep them from reeling it in for me, right?
Right.
And I'm like, that's not what I wanted out of it. But so when I first started doing the wade fishing thing, I wasn't fishing. I always had a rod with me, and basically more as a spare for whoever I was with. But since the whole Salt Strong thing, every time I go, these guys, listen, how come you're not fishing? I want to watch you cast. I want to see how you're retrieving. I want to see how you're rigging, right? I want to see how you're, what you're doing. But they love to watch the type of retrieve you're using, the speed, watch the cast, and even when you're hooking fish, as a guide, how it kills me especially if I'm leading the guy down a channel edge, because he's never been there and not sure exactly where to go. So I'm leading the way, and I hook into the fish that I was just hoping that they would have gotten, right. It's almost a little embarrassing, but you know what? They love to watch how you're fighting that fish.
Definitely.
And, even wade fishing is something that nobody thinks about until they actually catch one. Is how do you unhook a fish when you're wading, right? What do you do with your rod? And what happens initially? They all end up dunking their reels, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's not. You don't want to be doing that in the saltwater.
Right.
But teaching them how to keep their reels, out of the water, and how to grab the line and control the fish with that, and then pick it up. But so all of that is a big part of what I do. So a little bit different than maybe a lot of other guides are doing out there. But at the end of the day, probably like you, it's if you could turn somebody on to your passion, there's nothing greater.
No, there really isn't. And I think you said it so well. The most addicting part as a guide is seeing a client improve and learn through experience, and knowing that, whether it was something you said or a way that you showed them, or them seeing you catch a fish, to see them put it together, to see. I just love when I see some, I've got a client or something and we're sight fishing redfish, And for the past 3 or 4 trips, I've really had to talk them through each retrieve, when they throw and pitch out in front of a redfish, where to stop it, when to move it. And then to watch them, pick the redfish up on their own, pitch out in front of it, let the bait sit there, let the fish feel like they found it, hop the bait, the fish eats it. To watch them put all that together when it was so foreign, for a while is just really cool. And it's something, for guys like you and I that get to fish so often, you can easily forget those simple things that we just don't even really think much about, are things that, like when you were talking about working with a client, like, why am I casting here as opposed to there? Like, those are questions I get all the time working up a creek or a flat, and just forgetting to explain that to someone. But it's so nice when you have that person, that client that wants to learn, because you kind of reawaken all those thoughts and all that stuff that just kind of becomes second nature, and are able to teach that, which is really fun. I do love that part of guiding so much.
Yeah. There's no doubt. In fact, maybe the only downfall that I have several clients who over the years started as beginners, and I have some guys that just got addicted so quickly that they were booking me every 2 weeks for a while, wanting to learn how to go, and then maybe it was once a month, and as you'd expect, you become friends with these guys, right? And then at some point I'm like, and I've had this with, again, numerous clients. I've said, listen, I can't teach you anything. I can't teach you anything else. You know what to do. You know where to go. So, if you need a buddy to fish with, give me a call. Let's go fishing. But I can't charge you anymore. I'm sorry. I just don't feel good about it. And so I turn them into what I call my scouts, right? So I said, all I ask is this. So if you are out fishing, just drop me a line or send me a text. Hey, I was fishing over here the other day and caught this, or I caught that, or whatever. So I've got kind of this network of former clients that are keep me informed about where they're fishing, what they're catching, and as you might expect, there's only so many places you can go when you're waiting. So It's not uncommon for me to take a new client somewhere, and I'm running into an old client who's fishing there, and I love it when I see that, and it happens all the time. But yeah, so you gotta be a little careful, because keep doing that, you won't have any clients left. But anyways.
No, that's funny. Do you see? So you see kind of a mostly a local clientele down there? Do you have quite a few people traveling in to fish with you?
No, initially it was I'd say over the last 5 years, which is when I really started doing this full time. I've been doing it part time since 2000. And it was mostly weekends. And fortunately, I worked for myself, so I could, do my own schedule. But wasn't nearly as frequent as it is now. But 5 years ago, I started doing it full time. And again, it was really kind of getting involved with Salt Strong that really jump started the whole thing. And so, yeah, initially it was more local folks, but it's become, I'd say, in fact, wintertime, as you might expect, I get more out of towners because they're down here visiting from the Northeast and Midwest. A lot of folks during the winter in Florida here, so I get a lot of those folks. But it's probably, I'd say, almost now maybe 60% out of towners, 40% locals.
Wow.
So yeah, and it continues to seem to be getting more and more folks coming from out of town.
That's cool. That's super cool.
Yeah.
So what does a typical day, a charter with you look like if you're booking a trip to come do some wade fishing? Are you using your boat often to get to areas that you're wading, or are you mostly driving? Are you meeting clients at a parking lot?
I never use my boat to take a client. I shouldn't say never. Very rarely. And usually it's those guys that I've told you have graduated from my, as I said, from the Wader Dave School of Fishing. I'll take them on a boat occasionally like that, but I never take clients for hire on the boat anymore. For one thing, I have let my captain's license lapse, and just because I don't use it, I don't have insurance for that in my boat anymore.
Yeah.
So that's one good reason to keep me from doing it at this point. But I don't use it for that. So just wade fishing. So now I lost my train of thought and I forgot what the question was.
No, you're good. I was just asking what a day of wade fishing. You book a trip.
So
let's say like tomorrow, weather's perfect, we're going fishing, and I'm like, hey, let's do what you want to do. What would it look like?
Yeah, well, and this time of year, especially down here, as we're starting to get into the summer pattern down here, you really need to fish early or later in the day. The bite tends to be best, early in the morning, and as that water heats up, it tends to the fishing tends to slow down. Tides obviously play an important part of it, but in the summertime, I'd say morning and evening are almost more important than the tide. But so normally I'm getting an early start this time of year, so we'll start typically. We'll be on the water probably a half hour before sunrise.
Yeah.
So we'll be there right at dawn. If we've got the right conditions, we'll usually start with some topwater lures. Again, doing a lot of teaching. Folks love to learn how to walk the dog. They watch somebody, boy, that looks so easy to do, and I say it really is once you get the hang of it. But getting the hang of it takes a little bit. But top water, and then as the day goes on, I fish a lot of soft plastic. So it's showing folks, how to, again, tying a lot of knots even. I'll walk them through the beginning, exactly what the equipment is. I'll tell them the knot that I'm using to tie my braid to my leader, right? I'll explain to them that I'm using 20 or 30 pound leader. I'm using mono these days. I've kind of made the transition from fluorocarbon back to mono. It's a lot cheaper, and I haven't really found a big difference, to be honest with you there. So, if I think snook are going to be a likely target or going to be found, then I'm going to go to the 30 pound test if it's not as 20. But explaining to them that's the difference there.
For sure.
Show them how to tie the loop knot that I like to use to connect most of my jigs and other lures. Again, all those basic things. And then we get on the water again, depending upon the level of experience. I maybe even, first thing I do is, and I like to do, is take a video of them casting at the beginning of the trip, right? Especially if they're beginners. And then we'll watch them go throughout the day trying to give them tips. And then at the end of the day, I'll do another video of them casting, right? And it's amazing sometimes the difference between, just after 4 or 5 hours of weight fishing and taking 500 casts, the difference. So we'll do that. But so get out, we'll fish. Typically, it's about 4 to 5 hours of fishing. It's not unusual for me to cover 2 to 3 miles during a trip on foot. And, sometimes we may have to, depending on where we go, we may have to walk, a quarter, half a mile to even get down a trail or whatever it is to get to the water where we're going to get in and enter. And so that's not uncommon. Again, it depends on who I'm with and depends on their stamina level and all the rest. But that's very typical. I'm moving constantly, and that's one of the comments I get is like, boy, you don't sit still. And I don't. I said, it's all about covering water, just like when you're in the boat. I keep moving until I get a hit or I catch a fish. Then I stop and I'll slow down and make sure I thoroughly fish the area until I'm not getting hits or fish anymore, and then I'll move on. But I mean, it's constantly moving, and that's why I'll cover so much area.
Right.
So it's a lot of search going on. I do have a lot of trips where I'll bring a kayak or a paddle board along. And if I've got an area where we're going to get into the water close to where I'm parking my vehicle, I just load the kayak up with I've got a little milk crate with 4 rod holders. I put a cooler in there, my first aid kit and things like that in there, and I basically just trail it behind me as a platform to hold extra rods, gear, cooler, whatever it might be.
For sure.
And that's a great tool. But I also have trips where my clients will bring their kayaks too, and we'll paddle to get across channels and to get to spoil islands that we couldn't get to if we didn't have the kayaks.
For sure.
And the kayaks also really expand your range. So I've got a lot of spots where I may wade 3 miles down a shoreline, but the last thing I want to do at the end of that is to have to fish it all the way back again, right? And so if I have the kayak, I can just hop in the kayak and paddle back. So it really extends the range. And I don't fish from the kayak. I don't like to fish from the kayak. I'm always, trying to get myself positioned properly. I get, I see some of these fishing kayaks that have more stuff on them than my boat does, right?
Right.
Power, 2 power poles, depth sounder, 8 rod holders, the pedals on top of a trolling motor. It's crazy.
It is crazy.
And I'm like, gosh, I thought the kayak was all about trying to keep things simple and getting out and getting a little bit of exercise. And but my kayak is as simple as it gets. I don't even have anything on the sides because I'm constantly getting in and out. And you don't want to get hooked on your shorts or your belt, or your knitting pack, whatever it is, you're getting it out. So it's just really simple. I still paddle, actually, which nobody does much
They still
anymore.
make those paddles?
Yeah, it's hard to find them, but they still make them. But those are the things that a lot of times we'll do. So it's a little bit different. It depends again on how advanced the fisherman is, right? And I do get I get a lot of advanced guys who I've never caught snook. I'm going to go catch snook, right? So we're focused and targeted on that. Or I've never I want to go get a tailing redfish. And as I tell them, most of you guys are watching too many TV shows. They think that every flat you go to, you're going to see tailing reds left and right, and that's all there is to it. And I always see the guys, look at, there's 100 redfish right. No, those are mullets, sir. I'm sorry. I wish they were, but that kind of stuff.
Right.
So there's a little bit of everything going on. But
good to know that happens down there as well.
yeah, absolutely. Believe me.
Man, that is super cool. I love, and I'm very jealous of the simplicity of that. And I think it gets you back down to the basics. And the other cool thing, like I'm always a little jealous of kayaks, and now even more so talking to you of wade fishing, because I even have had this conversation with Wyatt. The fact of, and I think you're a good happy medium because you're talking about how you like to work quickly. But being on foot or being on a kayak does drive you to really pick an area apart a little bit better. Not like a boat where I could pull up to a bank and make like 3 casts and be like, that's not good. And then make a 15-mile run somewhere else and start fishing. I feel like you can really learn an area well, whether it's worth your time or not. And I feel like when you do fish slowly or just stay married to a zone or a spot that you have to walk or paddle, you a lot of times can catch fish there. You might not have caught fish there on a boat because you might not give it enough time. You might have worked too quickly. But do you feel that wade fishing really helps you understand a spot? Like you can fish a spot once and really know it maybe better than if you had rolled up on a boat and tried to fish it?
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. And for a couple of reasons. Number one, as you said, you're working it much more slowly, right? I mean, you're walking. If the water's clear, and even if it's not, you're feeling with your feet what the structure's like on the bottom, right? Mm-hmm. So, when you trip over a branch or an oyster bed that's down below, you can't see it. You know what? You tend to remember that, and that it's there. So you really learn, the structure, and again, you're working, much slower. But you're also, if you think about it, you can position yourself perfectly on every cast. Where when you're in a boat or a kayak, you're always compromising. You may have to turn this way or that way. The wind is pushing you one way or the other. So you not only you tend to get blown down a shoreline, so you're really trying to get your cast in, but you're not positioned properly all the time, like I am when I'm wade fishing. So I work an area not only more thoroughly, and I don't think this is redundant, but more effectively, right? So I'm making more casts in an area,
for sure,
but I'm also getting those casts in better position where the fish are likely to be than I might be if I was in a kayak, moving or in a boat. And so, if I fish a shoreline 10 times, and the other thing you discover too is that, I know where those fish are going to be after 10 times. I mean, you find the patterns, right? And so if I become really familiar with an area, I find it, okay, well, why are you speeding up here? Well, I've fished this spot 1,000 times. I rarely ever catch anything in this next 100 yards, so I'm not going to waste my time. Let's go to this spot where I'm catching fish, 100 times out of 1,000 instead of none, right?
Right.
But that, by doing that slowly, it really helps. Now, the disadvantage to that is that, when you're picking a spot wade fishing, and especially if you don't have a kayak or anything to extend your range, you're kind of married to that spot. So it's not like when you're going out in a boat, oh, okay, well, I have my plan. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spots. Well, we pretty much got one spot. And now it may be, a length of shoreline, but you're stuck with it. And if it happens to be the pattern just doesn't produce what you were expecting in that area, it can make for some tough days.
For sure.
And so that's kind of, as I tell people, it's the downside, which is why you've got to have more than 1 or 2 spots to fish. You got to learn where to go under different conditions, different winds, different temperatures, different water clarity, things like that, and learn where to go conditions, which will all help you. But there's no doubt that wade fishing, not only you're stealthier as well, right? You don't have any hull slap to worry about. You've got a low profile. It's amazing how many times. I mean, I am spooking fish while I'm waiting that, I mean, I'm about kicking them in the head before I even see they're there. So
Yeah.
they're not seeing me either, right? And so, there's no doubt in my mind that it's a stealthier approach.
For
And
sure.
so, again, and I think that's kind of attributes to what I call the being more effective when you're working an area because of that. So you can get closer to the fish and have a better chance of getting them before you spook them.
So you kind of just answered my question here, but this was something I was thinking about. So if I'm fishing, I used to do a lot of freshwater trout fishing, and if I'm working up a stream or a creek, I'm always, for the most part, if I'm in the water, down current, working up, so that I'm not disturbing that water down current as I'm fishing to it. Do you find yourself doing anything similar on those flats or maybe those shallower areas? Are you trying to, where you enter a flat, are you going to think about current and everything? Or
Sure, no, yeah. So the things that I'm gonna be trying to take into consideration when I get to a flat, right, is a few things. But wind direction is probably the first thing that I'm looking at, right? You want to avoid casting. I'd rather be casting into the wind or downwind than with the side wind.
Right.
It's really more difficult, right? So I want to be either, ideally I want to be working a flat, so I'm casting downwind if I can. I prefer to have the sun at my back if I can, right? And ideally, I'd like to be throwing my lure so I'm retrieving it with the tide, right? Because that's the natural direction of the bait fish coming. Now on a wide flat, you don't have the volume of water, constricted, so
right.
it's not like it is in a channel or at a pinch point, stuff like that. So the tidal movement tends to be much slower. So it's not as big a deal. I don't worry about it as much. But if I'm fishing, a pass, or I'm fishing the beach near an inlet, something like that, or even on the beach, as you've got runouts all over the beach. But there could be some pretty significant tidal movement along the beach. The water's coming in this way, but it's really not. It's running along the beach one way or the other. And so ideally, I want to be casting, as I said, up tide, retrieving the lure with in the same direction that the tide's running. We talked about sight fishing and especially like down here on the beach for fishing for snook. I tend to get right into the swash. I like to get right in the middle of it, and I'm just working my way and casting parallel to the beach, casting down tide and retrieving with it. So if you think about it, right, as I said, one of the downfalls of fishing, if you're staying on the beach, these fish can see you got a high profile. They can see it coming, especially if you're walking in the direction the fish are facing. Well, they're going to see a long way. But if I'm casting down tide and retrieving it, the fish are either facing into the current, right, or they're perpendicular typically, and so they're not as likely to see you. So I have a much better chance as I'm walking down that swash and casting. The fish are not looking at me, so I'm casting down awesome. And bringing that lure right in front of them. But yeah, so ideally those are the things. So I'll have people see me. We'll get to a flat, and I'll start walking all the way. Go, why aren't we fishing? I said, well, we're going to actually walk around to the other side of the flat, so we can be casting either with the wind, or have the sun at our back, or have the tide moving in the right direction, or ideally, right, when everything aligns, you can have all those things in your favor, right? And so that's kind of a thing that probably you like I do. I mean, I just do that naturally. I'm calculating as I'm walking out there,
right,
trying to figure out where I'm going to want to be on this flat, and then doing it. But you're right. But those are the things that it takes. That's one of those things that it takes just experience to learn and understand, and that can make a big difference for folks that don't get that, right.
Definitely. It's funny you say you kind of are doing those things daily as you're walking onto a flat, maybe calculating a little bit. I can a lot of times I'll notice clients looking at me, wonder what I'm doing when I'm constantly running the boat around, and I'm thinking about the spot, but I'm looking over my shoulder at where the sun is, so I can kind of plan out how I'm going to approach a flat or approach a bank. And I know they're like, does he think somebody's chasing him, or is there someone after us? Because I'm always looking behind me, trying to make sure I'm setting up just right for it. But yeah, it's those little things that you're kind of just the things that are great teaching. Great pieces to teach that oftentimes I feel like I forget because I just think about them. They're such second nature, but that's what a lot of our clients really want to know. It's like, all right, why are you doing this? Why are you setting us up here? Why is it important to have the sun behind us? One of the last questions, we're already at an hour, which is crazy. We got about 10 more minutes, but And we'll definitely would love to have you back on. I have so many more questions. But have you had any, this is a kind of a serious but silly question, crazy encounters spending so much time in the water? Sharks, stingrays, anything like that?
Probably not good for business, but yeah, all the above. In fact, like right now, we're kind of getting near the end, but we're in stingray mating season.
Mm-hmm.
And, these big southern stingrays get up on the flat. I mean, they're just, 4 or 5 feet across. They're just huge, and they're all over the place. And, and I've warned people. In fact, I have a liability waiver that is the craziest. I should send it, you'll laugh. It just lists all the possible hazards, right?
Right.
Including flesh-eating disease and all these other things that can happen while you're waiting. But stingrays are probably the one thing that we encounter. I mean, every trip people receive stingrays.
Right.
And that's why it's really important at the very beginning of every trip. You explain to them, hey, listen, we're going to move very slowly. Okay, we don't want to be running. We don't want to be lifting our feet high. We're keeping our feet low. Booty. I won't fish with anybody that doesn't have booties. I get guys who, I got the little beach slippers or whatever, or want to go barefoot. And I'm like, sorry, I won't do it. And I carry extra booties with me, just in case. But just protection, not only from stingrays, but from oysters, glass, whatever it might be. But that's a must.
Right.
But yeah, so stingrays are all over the place. Again, I'm probably going to get stung tomorrow for saying this, but I've been waiting for 40 years, and I've never been stung by a stingray while I've waited fish. Now, don't get me wrong, I've bumped into, I can't tell you how many, and when I bump in, if I'm shuffling and I bump into them, they take off. Right. I also tell people, listen, look where you're walking, okay? And so, especially if you're in clear water, you'll see the stingray. So if you see a stingray, we'll stop, poke them with the rod, they'll take off, okay? But look where you're going. That certainly helps. Sharks, more trips than not, I see sharks. Now, mostly bonnet heads,
right?
Which we're not worried about. We'll see a lot of smaller black tips, some lemons, things like that. In fact, when you're wading through a flat, and I tell people, I'll turn around sometimes, and you'll see 3 or 4 little bonnet heads or even some black tips just following us, and they're just feeding on all the stuff that we're bringing up when we wade through that grass and all the rest, right? And so you'll see that happen a lot in there. Oh my God! And I'm like, yeah, just relax. Now, I do, and I have on occasion. I've seen my share of bull sharks out there. I don't like them, and I don't want to see too many of them. But more often than not, it's been when I'm working an edge or a shoreline, and I'm doing the same thing. They're doing the same thing, but they're coming the other way. We're going right towards each other, and so fortunately, every time that's happened, they've seen me and they take off. I've had a couple times to poke them in the nose, and they've gone off. I did see probably the scariest thing I saw. Had to have been a 12-foot hammerhead, just working a mangrove shoreline in an area that was, in fact, it was a spot where I'd taken my boat out to a barrier island, and had gotten out and waited. I was half a mile from closest person, and that hammerhead was just working that shoreline the same way. I saw him coming. I saw his fin sticking out. I was in probably 3 feet of water, and he scared the living heck out of me. I'll be honest with you. That's the only time I've been I'm like thinking I got to go jump in the mangroves here or something. But
hammerhead's no joke.
Well, I'd never seen one there. I've seen them off on the beach or offshore, but not like that.
Right.
And so he fortunately he saw me. He just went around me, but I waited. I got back to that boat pretty darn quick after that. But yeah. So listen, you see that, but I see what I see. I see manatees all the time out there. I see dolphin are out there. Everybody, I hate the dolphin. They're eating my fish. I don't mind the dolphin because if I see them feeding, I know there's fish there. Right. And when they leave, those fish come back. It's not that big a deal. But the good things that I see while I'm out there, turtles and you see spotted eagle rays jumping, whatever. That's one of the reasons why I love wade fishing, and really outweighs some of the scary things I might see out there. And the reality is most of those things really aren't anything to be afraid of anyway.
For sure. Well, Dave, thank you so much for hopping on this podcast with us. Is there anything, any closing statements, anything we didn't touch on that you're passionate about that you want to share about before we hop off?
Oh, there's so much I couldn't even start, but no. Listen, I just appreciate the opportunity. I think as you and I, we talked. Get me talking about fishing an hour ago is just like that.
I know, it's crazy,
and I love it. After all these years, I still get excited about every trip, and the night before I'm always a little anxious and excited to get up and go. So I hope that never stops being the case, and that's when you know you're an addict. But as I said, I hope to have the opportunity to create more addicts as I continue to grow old here.
I'm with you on that one. So I'm going to link all of your information on the show notes for the podcast and the YouTube description. But just for our listeners that might not be able to click as they're driving down the road, how can they find you if they want to get out and either connect with you or get out and do some fishing with you?
Yeah, I have a website, and it's wadersguide.com. So WADERS, Waders, GUIDE.com. wadersguide.com. That'll take you to my website, and then you can contact me through there.
Awesome. And on Instagram, it's just Wader Dave. Wader Dave. At Wader Dave. So it definitely reach out to him, you guys, if y'all are going to be in the Tampa area and want to do any fishing. Just an awesome guy, great wealth of knowledge. And Dave, thank you so much for hopping on here with us.
No, my pleasure. I hope we have a chance to do it again.
We will definitely do it again, and maybe next time we'll talk about Texas.
Well, or maybe we get
kidding.
you down here and we go looking for some hammerheads. What do you think?
I'm always down to go hunt for a few big hammerheads on foot.
Okay, sounds good.
Well, guys, thank you.
Care.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Thanks for checking out another Eastern Current episode. We are excited to bring y'all another one next week. Definitely check out Wader Dave if you're in Tampa. Hit him up on Instagram. But until next time, thanks for checking out Eastern Current.